All right, so yesterday we talked about tangent. Today we're going to talk about sine and cosine. And so there's we abbreviate sine with just everybody says sin. But sine is the opposite side over hypotenuse, and cosine is the adjacent side over hypotenuse. So if you looked at all three, tangent, sine, and cosine, you're going to use the hypotenuse on 2 out of the 3, the opposite side on 2 out of the 3, and the adjacent side with 2 out of the 3. And so we do this thing called SOHCAHTOA. SOHCAHTOA. And so the S is sine, the O is opposite side, the H is hypotenuse, C is cosine, the A is adjacent, the H is hypotenuse, T is for tangent, opposite side over the adjacent side. So it's a way to remember the ratios for each of the trigonomic functions. Okay, and so they're done the exact same way. There's really no difference to tangent to sine or cosine. It's just a matter of pressing the different button. Okay, so if we had I think some of the beginning problems, it'll ask you to write the different ratios. So we'd say like the sine of angle A. Okay, sine is opposite over hypotenuse, so the opposite of A is 8, and the hypotenuse is 10. And again, you could simplify that. And the sine of angle B would be 6 over 10, or 3 over 5. Okay, opposite of B is 6. So we use sine in two different ratios, but we have different numbers because we have a different starting point. So that's kind of a distinction that we need to look at. So cosine of A, adjacent side or next to. So sometimes people say, well, is it the 6 or is it the 10? It's next to both. Well, the 10 is the hypotenuse. That doesn't change regardless of where you start. Hypotenuse is the side across from the 90-degree angle. It's the longest side of the triangle. So that doesn't change. So the adjacent side is 6 over 10. And we got the same 3/5. I'm going to come back to that in a second. Cosine of B, adjacent, 8. Hypotenuse, 10. Okay, so notice that the sine of one of the angles, B, is the same as the cosine of the other angle. And same thing, if you have the sine of A, it's going to be the same as cosine of B. They go hand in hand. That's why they're both combined into one section. So not to get into, you won't have to do any of this, but a sine graph, you won't be graphing anything, so don't freak out. A sine graph it's a wave, and a cosine graph is a wave also, but it kind of goes like that. And so you have all these points where it's not perfect, but you should actually be further like out like that. So you have all these points where like they meet. That's why then those are like the points where like these ratios line up. Okay, so again, you don't need to worry about the graph, but that's just kind of, it's like this wave and they match. Okay, so you'll have to write the ratios on some of them, and then maybe write down this SOHCAHTOA on the top of your page so that you can remember like which ones go with which. That'll be super helpful. Okay, all right, hopefully you're doing good. Hopefully this isn't too awful for you, but have a great day and we'll see you tomorrow. It's gonna to kind of use that relationship, so it's gonna have somewhere it's gonna say, okay, sine of 38, and they want you to write it using like what's the matching one for cosine. Okay, and it's really just like the two numbers need to add up to 90. So if you did 90 minus 38, you would get 52, and so the sine of 38 is the same as the cosine of 52. If you had the cosine of 47, don't have to put the E, then the sine, it's the same thing. 90 minus 47 would be 43. Okay, so you'll have some problems where it's just going to say, write these in terms of cosine, and it'll say sine of 38 or sine of whatever. And then it'll have some that say, write these in terms of sine, and it'll say cosine of whatever angle. Just remember those angles need to add up to 90, so you can just subtract from 90 to figure it out. Okay? All right, so then you'll get into problems where we need to solve something. Okay, and so you're always starting with sine, cosine, or tangent. You are always starting with an angle because you need to know, well, is that the opposite side? Is that the adjacent side? Is that the hypotenuse? And where you start matters. So if we start at 42, what information am I given? Well, I'm trying to figure out the side that's opposite, and I know the hypotenuse is 12, so opposite and hypotenuse, that's sine. And so we say sine of 42 degrees equals x over 12, and it's the same thing that we did yesterday, but with tangent. So get your calculator. 42 degrees sine 6691. So when we solve, we multiply the diagonals. 1 times x is x. And that decimal times 12 is 8.02. So I think they want you to round off to the nearest tenth. And oddly enough, they'll put like 8.0. If you ever see that where it's like 8.0 or 12.0 or whatever, it means it's been rounded off. So it's not really just 8. If it was 8, there wouldn't be the 0.0 there. It would just be 8. So just FYI. Excuse me. Okay. So for this one, starting at the 71, And so I know the adjacent side and the hypotenuse. So that's cosine x over 15. So punch in 71 degrees cosine 3255. So multiplying diagonals, x times 1 is x. 3255 times 15, 4.88, so 4.9. Okay, so I'm not doing the problem different. I just am using cosine or sine depending on what's been given. The x is on top, it's x over 15 and x over 12. So those ones, okay, and then so those are the easier versions because to be a little bit easier. The harder ones are, it's not hard, it's just an extra step. Is when the hypotenuse is the x. So again, I got to identify, am I supposed to use sine, cosine, or tangent? Okay, so at the 32, I have 8, which is opposite, and the x, which is hypotenuse. Opposite and hypotenuse is sine. Eight over x. So be careful when you're setting stuff up that you don't just put the x on top each time. Okay, so 0.32, oh, excuse me, not 0.32, 32 for sine, 52.99. Okay, and so when we multiply the diagonals, we get 0.5299 x equals 8 times 1 is 8. And then you'll divide. So 8 divided by 0.5299, 15.09 or 15.1. Okay, and it's not done any differently if you have cosine. Just press the cosine button on your calculator instead of the sine button on your calculator. Okay, and so again, 4 numbers is good for the decimal. If you do less than that, your answer will start to be off slightly. It won't be off a lot. So I got 15.09, for instance, because I did 0.5299. If I did 8 divided by 0.529, I got, so if I did 8 divided by 0.529, I got 15.12, which still rounds off to 15.1, but you can see it starts to get off. So some people have done even like 8 divided by 0.52. $15.38. So now we're, if you rounded that off, you would get 15.4, and look at your 0.3 off. That's kind of far, to be honest. Okay, so 4 numbers is kind of our magic number to work with. Okay? All right, so you'll have a mix of sine and cosine problems on your worksheet today. So that's the key really to sine, cosine, tangent, is that you excuse me, can identify which ones you're supposed to use. Okay, so really kind of slow down,